Hi, everyone. So today I'm going to give my Carowinds trip report. I'm going to start off with some general thoughts. So I was in Charlotte for a 3-day weekend. It was raining most of the weekend. Had one pretty good day where, well, relatively good, I guess, for riding roller coasters. It rained until about 11 or 12. I kind of had a late morning, just, figured I'd eat a big lunch, get a workout in, head over to the park a little late and kind of wait out the rain. So we ended up getting to the park around like 1 or 1:30ish. Just immediately when you pull up, you see all these huge coasters. I mean, you see Fury right there, Intimidator and Afterburn. It's pretty awesome. So I ended up getting the Fastlane Plus. And I'd recommend it to anyone visiting the park. Despite the weather, there seemed to be a lot of waits of about a half hour to an hour for most of the major rides. I think it's maybe around graduation time for some middle schools, high schools, that type of thing. So lines were pretty long. And I saved a ton of time by using the Fastlane Plus, so I would highly recommend it, even though it is a lot of money. All right, so let's get to the coasters. So first I went on Intimidator. I got 2 rides in, one in the second row, 1 second from the back. Overall, I really enjoyed it. It had a great first drop. I got very good airtime, mostly float. There's a little bit of ejector in there too. Don't really feel that the staggered B&M seats made much of a difference where, you have those 2 that are kind of like out on the sides and 2 in the middle compared to the traditional 4 across like you had in Fury 325. But overall, a very fun ride. Again, more of a traditional out and back type hypercoaster, but I feel like of the B&M hypercoasters, probably one of my favorites. I think it compares well to Apollo's Chariot. Although obviously Apollo has a little bit more of a setting and theming, whereas Intimidator kind of just goes out into the parking lot and back. But overall, a really great coaster. I really liked it. I'm going to give it a 9.5 out of 10. Okay, and so next, I got 3 rides in Fury 325. There's been a ton of hype around this coaster, and it delivered. The lift hill is huge. The first drop gives you great float. It lasts for a really long time. I love some of the elements on this ride, specifically the treble clef and the hive dive that kind of goes right under the bridge that leads to the entrance to the park. The ride was incredibly intense, maybe not at the level of something like Intimidator 305, but overall one of the most intensive coasters I've been on. I got one ride in the front, and it's amazing. It's definitely worth waiting for. There's nothing like the wind blowing on you like that when you're sitting there. It's crazy. I'd highly recommend it. I've heard great things about night rides too on Fury, so that's something to look into if you're at the park. And overall, right now, it's my number 1 coaster, and I'm going to give it a perfect 10 out of 10. Next up was Hurler, and this is pretty much a standard wooden coaster. It's kind of rough, maybe not as bad as some people make it out to be. It has 1 or 2 moments of airtime, and even though I had the Fastlane Plus, it didn't seem like the line was too long, maybe like 15 to 20 minutes. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. It's sort of in that category of being worthwhile, like if you have time to kill, you just want to get the credit, but not like a must-do. Next was Carolina Cyclone. This is a fairly standard arrow looper. You've got 2 loops and 2 corkscrews. I sat in the front, and I still got beat up pretty bad. I wouldn't recommend the ride. I'm going to give it a 3 out of 10 and move on, just because there's not much else to see there. After that, I went on Vortex, which is probably one of the roughest coasters I've been on. I got my head repeatedly bashed in by the restraints. Really didn't have any enjoyable moments in the ride. I'm giving this a 1 out of 10. I wouldn't recommend this ride to anybody. You should keep in mind I've only been on one other stand-up, which is Riddler's Revenge. But that was way more exciting and for whatever reason much smoother. Again, so it's kind of a strange comparison given that Riddler's is the biggest and I think universally considered the best stand-up coaster, but I just really didn't get much out of Vortex. I would hope the park would scrap it and, build some sort of compact steel looping coaster that maybe was more enjoyable. So next I did Copperhead Strike, which is pretty much brand new. I think it opened in late March. I really enjoyed it. It's got some cool country and southern style theming around the queue. The JoJo roll gives you some great hang time right out of the gate. The launch is fun, not too forceful. You get some really great hang time in that first loop. And I also really like the cutback inversion. I know it's a relatively rare element, probably most prominently featured on Drakenfire before it was torn down, but it's been on some newer coasters like the Gerstlauer Eurofighters. I think there will be one on Steel Curtain at Kennywood too. So I look forward to more coasters with the cutback inversion in the future. This was my first one, and I really liked it. So the ride overall was very smooth, There's really only one rough transition. The restraints are these thick, like relatively comfortable lap bars, but overall I like them. I think overall Mac did a really good job with this ride. I'm going to give it an 8. Next, I did Afterburn, which I was super hyped about because I've been on a ton of B&M inverts like Alpengeist and Montu, and I wanted to compare. And overall, it didn't disappoint. Afterburn was pretty intense. I really enjoyed a lot of the inversions, like the Immelman and the Batwing especially. It was probably one of the smoothest B&M inverted coasters I've been on, which is saying a lot for a ride that's 20 years old. I would say overall I'd put it slightly below Alpengeist since it doesn't quite have the sheer size, or maybe even the intensity that Alpengeist does, even if Alpengeist is a lot rougher, and I think for some enthusiasts sort of detracts from its ranking. I may have a slightly higher tolerance for roughness than some other people, but I think Afterburn is solidly my number 2 invert. Again, slightly behind Alpengeist, slightly ahead of Montu, and I'm giving it a 9. So next I rode Carolina Gold Rusher, which is basically a standard Arrow mine train. It was more intense than I thought, and overall I'd say probably a good ride for families. I'm not sure if I would rewrite it. Like, I just rode it to get the credit, but it's a decent ride if you have time to kill and the wait's not too long. And next up was Nighthawk, which for me was a surprise of the trip. I'd heard a lot of negative reviews of this coaster. I figured it would be nowhere as good as the B&M flying coasters I've been on, which are Tatsu and some of those Superman clones, like at various parks like Great Adventure. I'm not sure if Carowinds has done some sort of work to make it smoother, or it was just running well, but I rode in the 4th car, and there was some shaking around and rattling, but overall I wouldn't really say the ride was that rough. I do think B&M's loading system is preferable to laying down and then doing the lie-to-fly element after the lift hill, that we see on these Vekoma Flying Dutchman coasters. But this ride did have some really fun elements. I really like the horseshoe overbank turns, and the loop was pretty forceful. It's also cool the way that the ride flies right over the water. So overall, I'd say, yeah, it's still nowhere near as good or, generally as massive as Tatsu, but I had a solid time in this ride. It loads really slow. Maybe my perception or maybe even just overall enjoyment of the ride is skewed because I had Fastlane Plus. I would say if I didn't have a Fastlane, I probably wouldn't wait more than maybe a half hour or 40 minutes for it. But, given the good ride that I had on Nighthawk, I'm going to give this a solid 7.5. So after that, I just got a ride on the Boo Blaster's Shooter Dark Ride. It was fine. A bit of a letdown because my gun barely worked. It really registered only 2 targets the entire ride, and I got crushed by my girlfriend whose gun was working that time. So I'd hope that Carowinds would fix that in the future. But yeah, overall I had a great day at Carowinds, and I'm giving this park a 9.5 out of 10. They have a great collection of coasters. The park is clean. The staff is friendly. Fury 325 is a world-class coaster. If you happen to find yourself in Charlotte, I think that's pretty much worth the price of admission of alone, besides the supporting cast of coasters, which are also great. I would definitely go back if they add a new ride or if I find myself in the area. So again, stay tuned for more reviews. This theme park season may not be over for me. I may be going to Mount Olympus or Great America in Illinois in August, depending on my schedule. Thanks, guys.